The metallic clinking of the keys against the polished mahogany table was the sound of a decade ending, a decade I had spent as the scaffolding, a supporting structure used on a building site, holding up a family legacy, unseen and unappreciated, only to be dismissed with a folder pushed across the wood. My father's voice, announcing my sister Lena's name as a promise, was a final, deafening pronouncement of my irrelevance, even though I held the power of attorney, POA, a legal document giving one person the authority to act for another. A document signed in the sterile, lonely glow of a 2 a.m. hospital ward. When I placed that POA beside the house keys, the symbols of my decade of thankless, relentless work, everyone present mistook my action for surrender. They were wrong. This was not a white flag. It was a strategically placed, legal landmine set with the cold, quiet precision born of years operating behind the scenes, working out of public view, secretly or privately. The true nature of my gift to Lena, the facility, the title, the public admiration, was not the inheritance of the crown, but the unwrapping of an empty box, a beautifully decorated shell, the exterior framework of something, often without the necessary interior parts. The real legacy, the intangible, unable to be touched or grasped, not having a physical presence, spine of the entire operation, the licenses, the compliance protocols, the staff loyalty, the network of vital hospital and vendor partnerships, had already been meticulously, legally, and irrevocably transferred into the safe harbor of the Harbor Bridge Foundation. This foundation was my creation, my act of retrenchment, the reduction of costs or spending in response to economic difficulty, protecting the integrity of the elder care system from my family's shallow, image-obsessed focus. The very structure they valued, the buildings, was now worthless without the essential systems I had silently installed, maintained, and, finally, taken custody of. My childhood was a subtle masterclass in disparity, a great difference, a lesson taught in the humming, lavender-scented hallways of the care facility. While Lena floated, moved lightly and gracefully, through life with dance shoes and summer camps, the recipient of my parents' active, visible investment, I was granted responsibility, a quiet leitmotif, a recurrent theme, that dictated my movements. Cara's independent, they'd proudly tell people, never recognizing that independence wasn't a gift I was born with, but a necessary suit of armor I was forced to forge. The historical parallel echoes in the ancient Greek concept of the oikos, the household, where the labor that sustained the community, often performed by women or servants, was consistently undervalued compared to the public accolades, an expression of praise or approval sought by the patriarch. My father, in his long, confident strides, only glanced back to offer a distracted, prepackaged warning, "Careful, Cara," before turning to the person he was trying to impress. The dichotomy, a division or contrast between two things that are represented as being opposed or entirely different, was stark. Lena was the image, the polished façade, the face of a building, a deceptive outward appearance, and I was the grout. A thin mortar used to fill the spaces between tiles or stones, essential for structure, but never meant to be seen. Even my 16th birthday, marked by a store-bought, leaning sheet cake and a reminder to grab my work uniform for a mortgage-paying evening shift, served as a quiet, definitive rejection of my inherent worth in favor of my utility. I learned early to cease and desist, an idiomatic phrase meaning to stop a specified action and not do it again, from wanting, finding solace in the silent competence of a solved problem, becoming the girl whose usefulness precluded, made impossible, the need for praise or recognition. It was this ingrained pattern of solving crises quietly, navigating regulatory freezes, preventing the loss of Medicaid support, and stitching up the frayed ends of a faltering business that led my parents to turn to me in their time of need, handing over the POA not as a trust, but as confirmation of my unavoidable, burdensome role as the family's structural engineer. The storm did not arrive with a thunderclap, but with the quiet, unsettling shift of administrative currents. The first sign was an email chain concerning a state inspection that lacked my name, a seemingly small oversight, but one that signaled a larger, calculated elision, the omission of a sound or syllable, the omission of a passage or event, of my role. It was the digital equivalent of being edited out of the frame. This was swiftly followed by a photo from my mother, Lena, standing in front of the facility sign, all bright smile and wind-tossed hair under the caption, Future Leadership. That image, arriving while I stood in the supply room holding a box of wound dressings, symbols of the real, unglamorous work, felt like a direct, premeditated erasure. It was a reminder that in their eyes, competence was merely a precursor, a thing that comes before and indicates the approach of something else, to image. When I confronted them, not with anger, but simply by walking into a kitchen smelling of roasted peppers, my father offered the final, devastating euphemism. A mild or indirect word or expression substituted for one considered to be too harsh or blunt, Cara. Don't worry about the administrative stuff right now. It's time for Lena to take on bigger responsibilities. And my mother's soft touch, accompanied by the dismissive phrase, you're good with the behind-the-scenes things. Let her shine. The phrase behind the scenes landed like a physical blow, defining my entire existence as mere supporting cast for Lena's spotlight. The final piece of evidence was a folder filled with Lena's financial projections, inaccurate, naive, and stamped with my parents' initialed approval. It confirmed their decision was not based on merit, the quality of being particularly good or worthy, but on a deep-seated commitment to a narrative, a spoken or written account of connected events, a way of presenting or understanding a situation or series of events they had already written. Yet, instead of the expected argument or correction, I smiled. That smile was the moment of quiet, internal settlement, not surrender, but the recognition that the time for asking to be seen was over. The time for structuring my exit had begun. I understood then that my response could not be emotional. It had to be structural. My meeting with Dr. Hale, whose office smelled of cedar and old books, a place where truth arrived without theatrics, melodramatic behavior, confirmed my new path. You don't need revenge. You need structure. This philosophical underpinning led me to the concept of institutional capital, the total sum of knowledge, protocols, partnerships, and goodwill that makes an organization function, distinct from its physical assets. Historically, this echoes the transition from purely land-based wealth, the family's physical facilities, to intellectual and organizational capital, a shift that revolutionized industry and commerce. Over the next week, guided by the sharp, calm legal mind of Ms. Rowan, I used my still valid POA not for financial gain, but to fiduciary, relating to the legal relationship that exists between a person who acts for another. Safeguard the system itself. We established the Harbor Bridge Foundation, a legal bulwark, a defensive wall or safeguard, transferring the facility's intangible assets, the compliance protocols, my intellectual property, the licenses, the real spine, and the vital hospital contracts, the institutional capital, away from the family name and into a non-profit entity. My parents, consumed by the theatrical preparations for the legacy celebration and reassured by the promise of honorary advisory roles, a title without power, signed the final documents, mistaking this critical legal maneuver for routine administrative cleanup. The irony was profound. They were eagerly signing away the essence, the intrinsic nature or indispensable quality of something, of their business, believing they were solidifying its appearance. When the work was done, I returned to my duties, moving through the halls with a new, weightless certainty, observing Lena as she drifted through the facility with her soft smiles and color palette ideas, a specter, a ghost, of leadership unaware that the substance had already departed. The night before the celebration, I wrote the letter to Lena, a document of pure clarity, no anger, no accusation, just a precise explanation of the shell she was inheriting, a facility stripped of the necessary system. The ending line was my final, quiet declaration of freedom. What you carry next depends on what you choose to hold. The celebration was the setting for the unveiling, making known or revealing something private or secret. The room was warm, draped in soft lights, and the illusion of historical continuity. When my father tapped his spoon against the glass, announcing Lena was ready to lead, I waited for the applause to fade, allowing their moment of manufactured glory to play out, to happen or be performed fully. Then I stood and placed the three objects on the table: the keys, the POA, and the red envelope, the metallic tap of the keys serving as the final, irrevocable period, a full stop used at the end of a sentence, to my tenure. The keys were a symbol of physical ownership, the POA, the symbol of my legal authority, and the letter, the delivery of the structural truth. Lena's disbelief, "What is this? You're joking," was the first crack in the façade. My father's trembling hands, reading the outline of the transfers to the Harbor Bridge Foundation, and my mother's frantic scanning of the documents, culminated in the horrified realization, "This says we don't own any of this." Into the shocked, sudden hush, a silence of the room, Mr. Hayes, the Foundation's attorney, rose, a quiet, structural presence who had been, like me, blending into the background, remaining unnoticed, until his purpose was required. His calm explanation was devastating. "Everything in that packet is accurate. The facilities were now just two aging properties saddled with debt. The operational license was contingent upon meeting the rigorous care standards I had designed. Without adherence, the Foundation could revoke the license, rendering the buildings inoperable." My quiet, single sentence provided the final, stinging exegesis, critical explanation or interpretation of a text, especially scripture. They had exactly what they valued: appearance without structure. Lena's posture dissolved. Her whispered realization, "I thought I was taking over something real," was met with my only spoken defense: "You were. The system, the responsibility, the work. You just never saw it." I stepped back from the table, not in triumph, but in quiet, earned liberation. The power had shifted not through emotion, but through the unflinching, not shrinking from danger or commitment, logic of systemic control. A thought-provoking question/message. The freedom I felt was not the loud roar of victory, but the profound, unfamiliar silence of a weight finally being released, the absence of the perpetual, anxious hum of crises only I could solve. In the days and weeks that followed, the consequences unfolded automatically, following the new structural pathways I had built: the compliance notices, the staff resignations, the bank emails, all went to Lena and my parents, exactly where the responsibility now officially resided. My new office at the Harbor Bridge Center was small, plain, and flooded with the soft light of a new sunrise, a space defined by purpose, not family expectation. I saw my parents later in a Medicaid waiting room, and Lena, months later, quietly pushing a resident's wheelchair, both of them finally engaging with the real work, stripped of the spotlight. I didn't interrupt their moments. I simply let them be. This entire journey is a profound English lesson in the difference between denotation, the literal or primary meaning of a word, and connotation, an idea or feeling that a word invokes in addition to its literal meaning. The word leader denotes one who guides, but its connotation often demands public appearance and charisma. My life, however, taught the value of the quiet verbs: sustain, manage, safeguard, structure. The greatest act of strength is not to rage against injustice, but to step aside and allow the established, correct structure to speak for itself. What unacknowledged, essential scaffolding are you currently providing in your own life, and what action, quiet or otherwise, is required to move from the behind the scenes to the center of your own, self-authored narrative?